device makers want to kind of wave their hands and be like, oh my God, sensors and circuit boards. And they're appealing to this notion that all of us have who aren't particularly, familiar with electronics of like, oh yeah, man, I wouldn't want anything to do with that. That's cool. You don't want anything to do with it. That's cool. But somebody else does. There's a guy in your community.
And he should have the right.
And they should have the right to do it. There's a guy in your community who can do micro soldering, and he'd love to support his family with a repair shop in your community, fixing your stuff and everybody else's stuff. And he should be able to do that, or she should be able to do that.
My guest is Paul Roberts, organizer. How would you describe your role at secureRepairs.org?
Founder and organizer, I guess.
Chief cook and bottle wash.
Chief cook and bottle washer. That's right. That's exactly what I am. Secure Repairs right now is really just an organization that I started. We don't have any official tax status, although we're looking into becoming a 501c4, which would allow us to take donations and stuff. But really, it's just a kind of informal organization of cybersecurity professionals that I started, and I do a lot of the, bushwhacking and organizing.
Dating back to 2018, 2019, you created this organization. Why? Walk me back to what prompted this and why your own kind of advocacy. What brings this out to you?
So this grew out of my years of reporting on the security of the Internet of Things. And as you know, I started Security Ledger back in 2012, mostly to focus on that issue. I just saw it as an emerging issue that wasn't getting a lot of attention. And those years of reporting got me pretty well steeped in the many security issues around smart connected devices, Internet of Things, smart home, connected machinery, and so on. And also, I think, introduced me or gave me a early look at some of the problems that were coming our way, not just in security, but in the way that device makers were going to start using laws like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to really lock down and extend control over the things they sold past the point of sale. So not only say, we're selling you this device, but we're actually going to tell you how you can use it, what you can do with it, what it can and can't do, what parts you can put into it.
And there's a big business model attached to that, right?
Huge.
Because that becomes the subscription-based ARR recurring revenue model where I have a firmware interface to reach that device, and I can add features like the Tesla model, right? So
That's
you're
right.
talking about that in the smaller ICS IoT space. But let me throw a little curveball here. The whole idea of those things are meant to be use until they're done, throw them away and replace them because they're so cheap.
That's right.
Why did you what sectors or what areas what were the gaps in what specific areas, not the throwaway ones that, required this push to get this right to repair?
Right. I mean, there are so many, and just kind of to finish what I was saying before, I started getting interested in this sort of repair culture, and here in Boston, it's a very active one. I started going to these local fix-it clinics, and meeting people there who were just, these are just community events where people will bring stuff from their home, toasters and appliances and stuff. And there are people
there. And this is not hacker
fixers.
Spaces with enthusiasts. These are regular people who have things that are broken and trying to get repaired.
Absolutely. Yes. Having been to a bunch of hacker spaces, if you went to one of these, you'd see the similar types of people. It's a certain type of personality. But yeah. So I started going to these, met up with a guy named Nathan Proctor, who attends them and is the U.S. PIRG's national director for the Right to Repair campaign. And we just started talking about this issue. One of the things Nathan said to me is, one of the problems we're having, and at that point they've been trying to get right to repair laws for electronics passed in states for about 4 or 5 years. Manufacturers are coming in, they're saying hacker and cyber attack, and the lawmakers are running screaming out of the room. They don't want any part of it if they think that it's going to cause cyber attacks. And I knew enough to know that the arguments they were making just didn't add up. That really what they're talking about is kind of security through obscurity. We've talked about that. Yeah. By keeping something secret, by ourselves retaining total control over it, we can keep it secure. And you and I both know that that's not the way it works. Those are the arguments Microsoft used against Linux back in the day, and we both wrote a lot about how insecure Microsoft stuff was. Now Microsoft sells
So
Linux.
it's a lot of recreation of the old 1990s issues of vendors wanting to pursue security by obscurity, saying that exposing things and exposing eyeballs to things we're going to create more problems, when it's been proven over the years that exposing more eyeballs to things actually helps to fix problems more. When did you decide that, we really need to get a really intense lobbying effort here, and that the security community needed to come in to help educate lawmakers on like some of the problems you were running to? Was there a catalyst? Was there a single event?
I think Nathan was like, listen, if you know some cybersecurity people who could come to some of these hearings we're having in these state houses and just talk, have the conversation we're having, talk to these lawmakers, tell them that, that's not how, device security works. These aren't how cyber attacks on devices work. That would be really helpful to us, because right now there's nobody on the other side. We got the TechNet lobbyists who are, reciting their talking points. We don't really have experts of our own. And I, like you, got a good network of cybersecurity professionals. And I also knew, having been in the community for so long, like, cybersecurity people, if I had to guess, are right to repair people. These are tinkerers, explorers, hackers. They understand the need to, that when you have a device, it's yours to do with as you want. If you want to modify it, get it to, reprogram it, that's part of owning something. That's the right of a property owner. And so I said, you know what, I know people, and let me see if I can pull the community together and speak with one voice, have sort of an organization of cybersecurity professionals who can speak for the community. And that begat Secure Repairs.
It's very, very interesting, because I feel like even giving people devices and these things that you're talking about have become so computerized. Everything has got two CPUs on it, and it's meant to be a smart device. And repairability even seems to be something that's outside the reach of the regular person. What are you arguing for? What are you agitating for? And in this world of firmware delivering updates to devices and making it much more feature rich and so on, what is the perfect world scenario for you guys? We want vendors to release schematics, diagnostics information, give software access to these things? And I know we just had a discussion about security really doesn't work that way. Is there a real risk in some cases where exposure of these diagnostics information and so on to third-party repair shops and so on could expose people to risk?
Good questions. So a few things. First of all, all of us have gotten accustomed to this notion that there are things that aren't repairable, or that when things that cheap electronics that we buy, when we break, we should just throw them out and get a new one because they're cheap. Okay. We really need to disabuse ourselves of those notions, right? Those are notions that have been put into our head by corporations interested in selling us lots of things. Apple wants to sell us 3 or 4 iPhones in a decade, not one iPhone, right? Because that's very good for Apple's bottom line. But in fact, the iPhone can last a decade. Maybe it can last 2 decades, right? Our notion of how long an iPhone should last is something Apple has spent billions of dollars to promote and put in our heads. And right to repair works against that. It's saying, no, the best thing that we can do for ourselves, for our wallet, for our community, and most importantly, for the planet, is to use everything that we have as long as possible. Recycling, which is what the electronics industry likes to talk about. Oh, we recycle X percentage of everything, and we're so good about recycling. Recycling is better than just throwing it in a landfill, but it's not as good as extending the useful life of something, of making it usable for as long as it possibly can be. It's like your car, right? Drive that car for 20 years until it just can't drive anymore. Go to Havana, Cuba, see them driving 1950s Chevys around Havana, right? That they've maintained for decades, right? Whereas Chevy would have liked to have sold them 20 cars in that time frame. So the big thing with right to repair is really disabusing ourselves of this notion that there is such a thing as disposable tech, There isn't. And if manufacturers actually had to pay for the environmental cost of putting that device in a landfill, they might
They
change
would
their
make
own
it
behavior.
repairable.
Yeah, but they don't, right? Throwing something in a landfill costs them nothing, whereas they make a big profit rolling more stuff off the assembly line. So the big thing, the biggest tension we have is really trying to re-educate consumers about that. If you have a inkjet printer, right? I know you only paid $99 for it, right? It's a cheap piece of electronics, but the reality is if a dollar or 75-cent capacitor in that thing burns out and it stops working, the best thing for you and for the planet is not to throw that thing in the landfill and get a new $99 inkjet printer. It's to replace that 75-cent capacitor on the circuit board and keep that thing working for a decade, 15 years, 20 years. It crazy. It really shakes our notion of like, well, an inkjet printer working for 20 years, that's crazy. It shouldn't be. And if we had a robust ecosystem of small independent repair people who had access to the information they need to repair those things, then we could all have inkjet printers that lasted 20 years, iPhones that lasted 20 years, right? And the whole way we think about technology would change. But we're all sort of living in this world, the definition of which has really been created by large technology companies, electronics manufacturers that are interested in rapid refresh cycles, pushing new stuff onto us. Apple's big, CES every year, Apple's big product unveilings. Oh, look at this, it's new stuff. We don't talk about the cost of that to the planet, to our wallets, right? We need to change that. And Right to Repair is about that. In terms of
give me the perfect world scenario, what it would look like.
Yeah. A perfect world scenario, it would look something like the market that exists today for auto repair, right? You buy a car, you might take that car to the dealership and have them fix it while it's under warranty. Once it's off warranty, you're probably going to go to an independent garage, right? It's much cheaper, and they do just as good work. Maybe for some stuff, you might fix it yourself. You might go to AutoZone, buy the part yourself and put it in, new oil filter or something like that, right? Save yourself huge amounts of money. A healthy ecosystem for device repair would look like that. You would buy a new device from a manufacturer. Maybe they would support it, under some kind of warranty for a period of time. But there would be a huge and diverse ecosystem of small providers like the corner garage, parts suppliers. Back in the day, we had Radio Shack, but like stores like Radio Shack or online, equivalents, where you could buy parts to maintain it, keep it up, and there would be information, schematic diagrams, instructions, service manuals on how to do that. And then you could just, like with your car, keep it going, keep it on the road, so to speak, for years, as long as the thing can last. And that's what it would look like. But we don't have that right now.
And the only help you can get, like you mentioned, you're up against multi-billion dollars conglomerates with massive marketing budgets, getting us into that mindset of you need this new device, you need this new shiny thing. So you're up against that. You're turning now to governments and you're turning now to the politicians and policymakers for help, because it's clear that the manufacturers will not do it themselves. There's too much of an economic incentive there for them to retain the status quo.
Yep.
And you're not going to change people's notions on getting a new iPhone overnight. I mean, there's a whole, that's embedded into our brain. So now the idea now is to mandate manufacturers to do this, either at creation of the technology, once it's shipped, having these repair kits and having the ability for people to do repairs and so on. How do you, tell me what has happened once your official lobbying started around 2019 to today, and how have the politicians kind of shifted? Do you feel like there's momentum where the politicians are shifting their thinking?
Yeah, more good questions. So first of all, like what right to repair laws say, and there are
no federal laws, right? These are all like state.
There have been federal laws proposed, but no, there are no federal laws. The only right to repair laws in the country, there are three. Massachusetts, which in 2012 passed an automotive right to repair law that the auto industry then recognized nationally in 2014 with a memorandum of understanding and basically said, we don't want to have to deal with complying with 10 different versions of this. So we will honor the Massachusetts state right to repair law as if it's a federal law, which is why in Arizona, you can continue to take your car to an independent garage or go to AutoZone and get it
So
fixed.
everyone just kind of absorbed the Massachusetts lead from
the automakers
2012.
said, we're not going to fight this. We'll comply with it nationally instead of now having to go and, figure out what New York wants from us and what other states want from us. So we don't want to have to
linger here
deal
on
with
the automakers thing for just a second as it relates to a newer EVs and as we get into in the EV world. Do you expect it'll be the same? And are those automakers pushing out those newer things that require computers to fix? Have they kind of absorbed that Massachusetts thing? Are we moving along with status quo as it is?
No, and in fact, obviously, the EV maker that all comes to mind for all of us, Tesla, because of the way that the 2012 law was written, it only applied to automakers who have dealerships in Massachusetts, and because Tesla, of course, does not have dealerships
at all, right?
At all, it doesn't have to comply with the Massachusetts law, and Tesla has gone a very different route. Really, as a Tesla owner, you have very few choices but to get your car replaced at a Tesla authorized repair shop or Tesla dealership, Tesla service center. And it's incredibly expensive to get it repaired. And there are stories about, Tesla wanted $5,000 to replace this, but I found a guy to do it for $500. I mean, Google it and you'll see those stories.
The other traditional automakers in the EV world, because I'm bringing this up, and again, excuse my ignorance because I don't really follow this as closely as possible. I'm just an outside observer.
Yeah, that's fine.
It seems like if I have a Tesla, I don't want to repair it. Like I don't want to take it to a shop and have someone finger with so much computer systems and so many firmware interfaces and instances everywhere. Are you running into that at all from some consumers who
there's certainly that notion. I mean, what I would say is, fixing electronic vehicles, fixing sophisticated machinery is no different from fixing anything else. You're right. Electronic circuit boards and sensors do make devices more complex than when they were just mechanical. But that does not mean that there aren't people who can fix them. And you can go on YouTube and watch entire tutorials on microsoldering, right? Where they're soldering with a microscope and little solder things that are the width of a human hair and fixing tiny components on circuit boards to get them working again. Any repair that you can imagine can be done. And it can be done by the manufacturer and their authorized repair people, or it can be done by your neighbor if he's into that, a shop in your town. There's nothing inherent about the fact that this stuff runs software or that it has microelectronics in it that make it unfixable. Device makers want to kind of wave their hands and be like, oh my God, sensors and circuit boards. And they're appealing to this notion that all of us have who aren't particularly, familiar with electronics of like, oh yeah, man, I wouldn't want anything to do with that. That's cool. You don't want anything to do with it. That's cool. But somebody else does. There's a guy in your community.
And he should have the right.
And they should have the right to do it. There's a guy in your community who can do microsoldering, and he'd love to support his family with a repair shop in your community, fixing your stuff and everybody else's stuff. And he should be able to do that, or she should be able to do that. Jessa Jones on YouTube has a whole channel just on microsoldering. She's an expert in it. And it's also about accessibility. People say like, well, your iPhone breaks, you should just take it to the Apple store. There are states in this country where there are no Apple stores, including Vermont, just to the north of me. No Apple store in the whole state. So if your phone breaks and you want to go to the Genius Bar and you live in northern Vermont, you might be driving 3 or 4 or 5 hours to do it. And that's, if you're poor, that's a day off of work for you.
I want to come back.
It's also about having access to those things in your community where you are. Yeah.
I want to bring it right back to the policymakers. Are you starting to see the mindset among policymakers changing, and how would you describe
So the other thing I'd like to point out is, so these right to repair laws, all they really say is they don't force manufacturers to make stuff repairable. They don't force or ask anybody to offer repair services. All they say is, if you offer repair services, authorized repair services, right? So think the Genius Bar, right? Or Best Buy, Apple, So if you offer repair services and you give your authorized repair people special tools, parts, information, schematic diagrams, diagnostic software. Apple's got a whole bunch of diagnostic software. If you give it to those authorized repair people, you have to give it to the owners of the device, and you have to give it to independent repair people as well. You can't have a monopoly on that information and those tools. That's all it says. You want to make something that can't be fixed, like the AirPods, right? Unfixable. Go ahead, knock yourself out. But if you offer authorized repair services, you can't have a monopoly on those. That's all right to repair laws say. In terms of the changes in the mindset,
what are the successes you've had? Let me rephrase the question that way in terms of the changes in the mindset to the politicians. What are some successes you've had? What are things that keep you going?
We've had a pretty good year. 2022 was a pretty good year. We passed, and I'm on the board of the Repair Coalition. So I'm, it's not like I'm like
You're not making this up, yeah.
Objective journalist. Like I don't get I came off the sidelines for this. Like I'm on the Repair Coalition. Like I'm lobbying. Like I'm not objective at all. But we had some successes. We passed in Colorado a right to repair law that just covers power wheelchairs. So there was a hearing in 2021 they had just a generic right to repair electronics law. And there were a lot of people from the Colorado disabilities community who came out in their wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, and saying, we are waiting months for simple repairs to our wheelchairs. Without our wheelchairs, we can't move. We're in bed. We're getting bed sores. We're going to the hospital. And it's because...
So it's just for wheelchairs in Colorado.
Just power wheelchairs. And all these lawmakers... So that law died in committee. But all these Colorado lawmakers were like, you know what? If there were just a law for wheelchairs, I'd vote for that. But I'm not going to vote for this electronics right to repair. We came back the next year and said, great, here's your law just for wheelchairs.
We'll take what we get, right? I mean, right.
Yeah. It passed.
Was that a take what you get thing deliberately, or were you just kind of like we'll just take these small wins and try to rack it up as we get going?
Exactly. It's like, listen, it's a step in the right direction. Yeah, it's only one category of product, but first of all, for the wheelchair users in Colorado, it's huge. And
if you can prove it as a proof of concept that it doesn't expose security issues here, or it doesn't expose security risks here, you might get it expanded, or you could bring forward some future expansions, right?
That's right. And now Montana actually has a wheelchair right to repair bill that they're considering. So other states have taken note of that.
Right.
And it was sort of taking them at their word. Like, listen, you said if it were just wheelchairs, you'd be in favor of it. Let's see. Let's see. And lo and behold, they were good to their word, and it was bipartisan, passed overwhelmingly. So that was that. The other one, big one, was the New York. Well, there were actually two. The New York State right to repair law. You're a former resident,
former New Yorker here. I paid attention to that one because I want to ask you a little bit about the bill that actually passed got watered down at the end because of some last minute lobbying and so on. And I want to ask about let me let you finish up first. So New York, you said.
So New York was a big one. That was basically a broad electronics right to repair bill that the industry lobbyists went in during the legislative session, carved out a whole bunch of stuff. Home appliances got carved out, agricultural equipment got carved out, cars got carved out. So it was limited, but it was still pretty broad. It was basically personal electronics. And that was amazing. It passed, I think, 145 to 1 or something in the New York Assembly, and by veto-proof majorities in both the Senate and the state Assembly. So bipartisan Republican Democratic support went to Governor Kathy Hochul, who took over after Governor Cuomo stepped down, and sat there for 6 months.
Because of lobbying and because of lobbyists, right?
TechNet. And frankly, even lobbyists for some of the product categories, AHAM, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, was still lobbying against it, even though it didn't even apply to their members,
right?
Because they just want to kill these things. And she unfortunately acceded to them and forced. I didn't know this about New York about New York government. Maybe you did, but the governor actually has a tremendous amount of power to kind of unilaterally renegotiate legislation with the legislature and kind of force in their own changes in exchange for their signature. And she
were you
was
guys involved in that lobbying and lobbying her office as well?
Yes. Secure Repairs briefed, both wrote wrote her correspondence and her staff and briefed her staff in a Zoom to talk to them about the particular, because one of the things she was responding to was this, argument from TechNet in particular, oh, this is going to create all kinds of cybersecurity risk.
Security problems, right?
We got on the line with her specifically and said, that's not true. That, this is not, first of all, connected devices are terribly insecure. It has nothing to do with device schematics, right, or diagnostic codes or software or spare parts. It has to do with the fact that smart device makers are making really poor, right, quality software and actually pushing that out into the market.
And where it gets even more ridiculous is they're giving these schematics to their own authorized resellers who can't be relied on to keep it secure anyway. So right, I mean, the information is coming out anyway. It's just that you're maintaining your monopoly to give it to your preferred authorized vendors, right?
It's just like if your auto dealership, if you were to say like, I think I'm just going to take this to a corner garage, right? This is cheaper, they're going to argue till their face is blue. Oh, don't do that. They do terrible work. They use crappy parts. You want to use OEM parts. That they're full of it, right? They're like, no, they do good work. And those aftermarket parts, they work fine. And it costs me half as much. It's the same argument. Those independent repair shops, they do terrible work. They don't. They do fine work. The parts they use are fine. In fact, authorized repair is no better than independent repair. There's no data that's ever shown there's any difference. And when the FTC had a hearing in 2019 about this whole issue, they asked the manufacturers, listen, if you got data that shows that authorized repair is any better than independent repair, that your guys are safer, that they handle data any better, or, more secure, please give it to us. They were never able to.
You'll never get that.
You'll never get it because it doesn't exist.
So Governor Hochul signed again more of like a watered down final version. But we have something in New York State that applies to certain categories, right?
And in fact, all the changes were so last minute. I mean, this was literally 11th hour. All the changes were so last minute.
And this is recently, like a month ago, maybe.
A few weeks ago, yeah. There's a lot of really confusing language in the bill that ultimately got passed. And what I'm hearing is some of it may be very beneficial to repair. It's really going to fall to the state attorney general to sort out with all those last minute changes what the heck the bill actually says and what it allows. And we're just going to have to see how that turns out.
Where else are you getting traction? And what happens next? And I want to ask about Deere as well, because I just saw a news story on the BBC that John Deere is suddenly going to open up. And I know Deere was a big part of the anti-repair lobby.
They're kind of the poster child for.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, that's where the farmers were saying, listen, this is untenable, right?
Right.
What exactly is the status there?
So what's happening in 2023 is what's happened in every year pretty much since 2014. So a bunch of states already have brought forward right to repair bills of a variety of different shapes and sizes. Some of them are just a generic electronic, generic right to repair bills that stretch across product categories. Some of them are focused on agriculture. As I said, there's one in Montana focused on wheelchairs. Massachusetts is going to probably bring one forward focused on portable electronic devices. So we're just going to see a lot. We've had 20 plus states for the past 5 or 6 years that have brought these forward. I think we'll at least see that this year. Now that New York did what it did and so on, I think there's this sense of like, hey, we can get this done. So that's going to happen, and we'll see. Many of these are going to die. Particularly in some of these legislatures, out in the Western states that are part-time legislatures, they're meeting every 2 years for like 2 weeks, and they got a full agenda and they just can't get into the weeds with this stuff. But for the other states, the Washington states, the Californias, the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine,
is there a red state, blue state divide on this issue?
Not really. That's one of the really interesting things. And I must say, as somebody who's been working on it, I think one of the really heartening and encouraging things is
bipartisan as much.
We have had Republican sponsors, Democratic sponsors. These things get traction in red states just as much as blue states. And this is something that cuts across party lines. It appeals to people's sense of just fairness, people's sense that corporations are too powerful, that they're, it's, there's a lot of conspiracy theories and the system's rigged and so on. I think a lot of those are misdirected. You look at some of this stuff, you're like, yeah, the system kind of is rigged. And here's how they're rigging it. They're getting in there and lobbying and preventing legislation that would really help you and your family, buy and hold on to electronics, help your community and small businesses. But these bills are getting killed off. So no, yeah, it's really encouraging. I just went to a right to repair hearing for agricultural equipment a couple months back in North Carolina, and you had small farmers from rural communities getting up there and speaking passionately about the really terrible conditions that they suffer under as a result of restrictions on repairing agricultural equipment.
And it's odd because a lot of the times you have to use security vulnerabilities to go fix things yourself. And then you get into this weird world. What can we expect from the federal government, or should we expect any activity from the federal government? And what have you guys been doing to attract some sort of their attention?
So last year we saw a number of right to repair bills introduced on Capitol Hill. There was the Repair Act. And there were some auto right to repair bills introduced. Bobby Rush introduced one. So a bunch of there was Senator Tester introduced an agricultural right to repair bill. None of them passed. Well, they did not pass. They just kind of died in committee. But I think the expectation is we're going to see those back again this year. Obviously, the House has changed hands. Not exactly sure what the disposition of the Republicans are towards this, but I wouldn't assume that they're not going to move forward. I would expect that they will move forward in some form. I'm just not exactly sure where. But there are a bunch. There are agricultural right to repair bills. There are auto-focused right to repair bills. There are electronics-focused right to repair bills. And there are bills focused on really reforming the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Right.
Which
is a remnant from the early
90s,
2000s that blocks people from looking at things that are software-based, right?
Blocks people from circumventing software locks and blocks people from distributing tools to help other people disable software locks. And that's a big one because, even if you can get exemptions, like there's an exemption for circumventing software locks to repair farm equipment, right? So you can do that without violating the DMCA. The Librarian of Congress made that determination a few years ago. The problem is that without the tools to do it, it falls to every farmer to basically hack their own tractor.
Right.
And this is an $800 or $1 million piece of machinery. As a farmer, you don't want to risk it.
The same conversation we just had around notions of repairing things, right?
So you need somebody else's tools, right? You need Joe Grand's tools or Bunny Huang's tool to do that, but they can't distribute it because of the DMCA. So,
all right, you mentioned Joe Huang, you mentioned Joe Grand, Buddy Huang. I want to ask about something that is quite noticeable to me. Maybe I'm wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. The security community, the hacker community, has not fully leaned in on this right to repair thing. They've been peripherally in the background helping. There's been some, and I don't know, you've been working along with folks to do talks, fixing the Fix conference. Like you guys did a lot of work with the security community, but I don't feel a groundswell of hacker communities, security communities, makers, hackerspace groups of guys really leaning in. And is that fair or unfair? And what can the security community do? What more, or how would you like to see them embrace it more? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's a good question. As you know, I think the information security community in general, the people that we deal with, are not what you call joiners. They're individuals. They have their own thoughts and their own opinions. They're super smart. Cybersecurity professionals like we're used to dealing with are individuals, and they have an individual mindset. And they're engineers, so they tend to look at things based on the merits. They're not the sort of like, hey, yeah, give me a T-shirt and give me a hat, and I'm going to go out there and hold a sign. Like I think that's not their go-to. They want to understand things. They want to understand the stakes in things. And then, if they agree, they'll get involved. We've got more than 300 IT and infosec professionals and who have agreed to be supporters of secure repairs, and we've had them turn up to state hearings and brief individual lawmakers or groups of lawmakers one-on-one. So I've been really heartened by the response. We, like any other organization, we got a core group of people who are highly involved and a much bigger group of people who are kind of loosely involved or following it. But I think the problem is less the information security community not being highly engaged with this and just sort of the level of awareness of right to repair generally in the society. I think it's something that if you're in this nerdy little area, you're following this issue, it seems like, it's a big issue, but you go out to a party and say right to repair to people and they're like, what?
That's why. That's
so
why I asked
it's just the level of awareness. Yeah.
How can I lean in here in Arizona? How can security people in general lean in? What are the needs? And how do we, like, how do you knowing how hackers operate?
Yeah.
How can the security community be used in a way to disabuse those notions of it being a security problem? Like, give me some examples of some projects or talks or things that my audience listening to can say, listen, let's lean in and do a project and go get a black hat talk out of this. Like, give me some examples of how guys should be thinking.
So the first thing they should do is go to securerepairs.org. So that's SECUREPAIRS.org and give me their,
just
sign
gander
up
around there, right?
You don't have to, if you don't want to, if you work for a company, you don't want your name listed publicly, that's fine. That's part of the registration part. You can just be on our list of people we can work with, but we won't list you publicly.
So you want to grow that list?
I want to grow that list.
You want to grow that public visible list, right?
Right. I started Secure Repairs in one sense to be sort of a speakers bureau because I knew there were going to be right to repair laws happening all over the country. And I wanted to be able to be like, okay, there's a hearing in Indiana. Who do we have in Indiana? Let's send this guy. Because for lawmakers, it makes a differess if you're in Indiana that you got somebody there in the hearing,
subject matter expert,
who's a constituent from your state, not some guy from Massachusetts, right? So I wanted people all over the country, and we've got that. So what I'd say to your listeners is there's a really good chance, no matter what state you live in, that there's going to be a right to repair bill coming up for consideration this spring and into the summer. And there are going to be hearings, and there are going to be, virtual or in person, that you can go to and testify, or even just send an email in to the committee and say, hey, I live in your state. I'm a cybersecurity professional. I support this law. The cybersecurity, there aren't really cybersecurity issues with schematic diagrams and stuff like that. That in and of itself is hugely helpful. And then, of course, like any other organization, if you want to do more, if you want to be like, hey, let me organize people here in state, I've got, contacts in the infosec industry or the IT industry who also support this with me. We'd like to do more in the state. Let me know, and I can facilitate that. That's kind of one of the reasons I started Secure Repairs. Right. So they can really act locally on this, and actually acting locally will make a big difference in getting some of these laws over the line.
And I want to end with one small thing. What are you noticing vendors and companies that are embracing right to repair? I know of one, and I want to. Perhaps you're obviously you'll be aware of them. Last year at the LabsCon conference, we gave away these framework laptops, FRAME.org framework that allows you to literally repair your laptop, swap in tools, and they sell all these things. So it seems like it might be a tiny percentage, but there's some vendors who might be leaning in on this save the planet. Let's let people repair their things. We don't need a laptop to be. You don't need to replace and refresh laptops every year and a half. I mean, we have functional things here. So in addition, talk a little bit about Framework, what you know about how they're leaning in, and are there others that we don't know about that we can give props to?
There are. So Framework's amazing. I do a podcast on that. So I started a newsletter called fight2repair.news, and we do a little podcast associated with it because, of course, Brian.
And we can find that on securerepairs.org.
You see it referenced, but just go to fight2repair.news. Okay. Yeah, and it's like a Substack that I started because, Ryan, I'm not busy enough. But we interviewed Nirav Patel from Framework on it. Amazing organization. They really started with this whole idea of sustainability. and that we should give people the ability not just to fix their laptops, but mod them, expand them, and make that easy for them. And it's a really amazing platform. I think it's getting a lot of cred in the sort of hacker community, engineer community.
You're a big fan of how they're approaching it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think iFixit gave them like 100% on their, fixability index. I think it's like the highest score
so
ever given.
That would you say that's the model of how others can kind of look at and take some examples from?
Yes. On the phone side, there's Fairphone, which is a sort of the framework of the smartphone world. Fairphone is based in Germany, I think. And they make very similar kind of modular, repairable, expandable smartphone, runs Android. Honestly, even if you look at traditional players like Dell, Dell introduced a sort of super fixable version of their laptop. But even before that, Dell is a company that makes replacement parts, schematics, service manuals for all of their laptops and desktops freely available. They've always been a very kind of pro repair company. Just you think of the nature of Michael Dell building computers in his garage back as a teenager, but that continues to this day, and they're in general a very, certainly compared to a company like Apple, pro repair company. And they just in 2022 introduced an even more kind of, repairable version laptop that they're going to be selling. So Dell is a company that I think already gets it and is expanding it. We've seen even, Apple Computer.
Apple is starting to ship these fix-it kits that you can request. Right?
That's right. Yeah. So Apple, Samsung is partnering with. Sorry, Samsung is partnering with.
Let the dog bark. We'll have it in the archives forever.
Okay. Samsung is partnering with iFixit to make repair parts and tools available for their smartphones, for their Android phones. Apple obviously introduced its own self-service, self-repair program. It's problematic, but nevertheless, it's progress. So we are seeing manufacturers start to recognize this, start to realize that, especially younger people now, sustainability is really a big concern for them. And they're not so cool with the idea that, you have something for 24 months and when it breaks, you just throw it in the landfill.
Interesting. It's interesting that you bring this up, because I noticed this with a generational shift around this thinking, this consumerist thinking of throwing away and getting a new one. I don't know if it's just my exposure to my kids and like the next generation in my world, but they're not actively refreshing iPhones or demanding iPhone refreshes. They're cool with their old iPhones working just as it is. They're cool with repairing and so on. Are you sensing a generational shift in thinking they're one? And are you sensing a generational shift among the politicians to say, you know what? At some point there's corporate lobbyists that are going to be paying them at some point, right? So you're battling against that. And what is that push and pull? Do you get a sense that there's progress happening?
That's a really good question. On the question of younger generations, young men and women, our kids' age, absolutely, 100%. Their attitudes around what's important and what's valuable. They very much value sustainability, environmental, awareness. They're not as into the sort of,
it's noticeable to you, right?
Yeah. And you and I kind of grew up in the 90s, like new stuff, like, oh, cool, new technology, and, they're
not enamored with it. So
they're less enamored
of that.
Yeah.
This word, right.
On the legislator side, you're dealing with a different demographic, right? Older, honestly, having lobbied all over the country for this, you just realize that, your lawmakers live in a real bubble environment, and the people, honestly, that they're encountering day in, day out are not their constituents. They're basically lobbyists. That's who they spend all day with. That's who they go to lunch with. It's who's taking them out at night to events. That's the milieu they move in. And so their framework and their understanding of things is very much shaped by those people, by their staff too, for sure. But, breaking through that noise as somebody who doesn't have a big campaign contribution in your hand is difficult. So, it's an uphill battle with that group. There are, amazing
lawmakers. Are there folks in Congress who are allies? Yeah,
Yeah,
that was going to be my next question right
there
now. There's
are.
some
There are. I
amazing
mean,
lawmakers that stand out.
there there are. I mean, Bobby Rushforth is his auto repair bill. Senator Tester. My Senator Elizabeth Warren is very positive on this stuff. We've had a representative from Washington State who actually owns a auto repair shop,
Oh,
who
interesting.
just got elected, who really ran a Democrat, won in a pretty red district, running on repair as actually a really big issue, leading issue. So it's
Yeah.
one of those. I try and say to legislators, like, this is you want to like get on the cutting edge of where people's thinking is and what they're concerned about and what really gets them motivated. And these issues around corporate control and corporations kind of trying to reach in and cut off, squeeze, strangle small businesses, force you to pay an arm and a leg for a simple repair, keep you waiting 2 months to get your wheelchair repaired. Those are things that people are experiencing day in, day out in their lives. Really pisses them off, and they're looking for lawmakers to help balance that playing field, to stop having it be tilted so far in favor of large corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations, private equity firms, that type of thing. And Democrat or Republican, if you want to get really appeal to voters who are struggling with those things, whether it's farmers or just a small business owner, right to repair is a good way to do it. People really do, heads nod. People really respond when you start talking about this stuff. So, I think the smart lawmakers are there. I think they see that, and they're getting behind it.
We're running out of time, so I'll give you one last question. What
Sure.
should we look forward to next from this right to repair movement? Are there some bills bubbling up? What happens next? What should we look forward to in 2023?
Again, there are bills already been proposed in. I should check my list. It changes every day. I mean, certainly there have been bills proposed in more than a dozen states already. Dealing with
various.
a bunch of them are agricultural focused. Some of them, again, wheelchair focused. Some of them kind of electronics focused. So what I would say to you is, if you're in a state, and first of all, register with securerepairs.org. We will keep you informed on what's going on in your state, and we reach out to people and say, like, hey, there's a hearing coming up. If you're interested, let us know, and we will help you to get registered to testify, or send you the information on how to email in your comments or testimony. You don't always have to do it in person. So I would just say, keep your ears up, because this stuff is definitely coming to your state, and you as an InfoSec person really have a lot to add to the conversation. Your voice is really important in this, and we want you to be able to speak up.
My friend Paul Roberts from securerepairs.org. Thank you very much, Paul.
Hey, Ryan, it's been great.